Well, good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tammy Lardner. I've been married to my hubby Wayne for 26 and a half years. We have 2 daughters and a son-in-law. I'm the office manager for a small family-owned manufacturing company in Ingleburn, and I've been part of church here for 20 years. In that time, I've been involved in worship, hospitality, and life groups. I've been on the Women's Ministry Committee for the past 3 years, and I recently joined the board. It's a privilege to share how God has brought me to this point in my life, and my hope is that my story shows you his compassion and unfailing love. I was blessed to be born into a Christian family with 2 older sisters and a brother 5 years younger than me. Both sets of my grandparents and my parents were members of Churches of Christ. My dad's parents were at Kingsford and my mum's were from Penrith. We were also members of Penrith Church of Christ. During the first 3 years of my life, my parents were missionaries in Vanuatu, which was known as New Hebrides at the time. I don't remember any of it, but I have been told that I was quite adventurous and determined to keep up with my sisters and all the other children in our community as I grew. I was also told that I was quite unwell a lot while we were there. In this photo, they were apparently going to post me home to my grandparents, which I wasn't too happy about. I was also brought home for eye surgery when I was 2 years old. When we moved back to Australia, my parents were never in a position to be able to own their own home again. Thus, while I was growing up, we moved houses many times. They were both hard-working and sacrificed to send all 4 of us to a Christian school. Of utmost importance to Mum and Dad was regular church attendance and participation. We went to both morning and night services every week as a family. And as a young girl, I loved Sundays. We had close relationships with many of the people there due to Mum and Dad's involvement. And Dad was part of the leadership in different positions over the years, presiding, on the board and in worship. He enjoyed composing songs on his guitar and piano and singing with my mum. We were often involved in... Sorry, can you take that slide back one? My sisters and I were often involved in doing items along with Mum and Dad at church, and I'm sure that my love of music and worship through song comes from there. I enjoyed the same Church of Christ camps in primary, high school, and afterwards at Stanwell Tops that Kath mentioned a few weeks ago, and I loved the feeling of community and inclusion I felt while there. And I'm so thankful to my parents for their commitment to bringing us up with the knowledge of the Lord. At 8, I witnessed a family member give his life to Jesus and be baptised. And I recall being overwhelmed at the joy in the family and how happy he was, and decided that I wanted to give my life to Jesus too. So I spoke to my parents and our minister, and I was baptised soon after. I remember the desire, even at that young age, to follow Jesus and wanting to serve him in ministry. I also remember being disappointed that the response for me was different from what I had seen and expected. That same year, I had to have more eye surgery, and then I repeated Year 3 the following year at school, and life changed for me. I no longer felt that I fit in and that I was dumb. While I wasn't bullied in today's sense, I was treated badly and started believing I was the names I was being called, that there was something wrong with me and I wasn't accepted by anyone. As I moved into high school, I didn't apply myself because I didn't think I was smart enough to do well anyway. So I became more concerned with trying to fit in, even though I felt those I hung out with didn't even like me. And I felt on the outer and lonely for the majority of my school life. While my schooling had been a struggle, I did have some friends at church, but as I started liking boys and they started noticing me, I I began latching on to anyone who I thought liked me, and as unhealthy relationships formed, I was easily persuaded to be involved in activities I didn't want to do so that they would keep loving me. Although I was involved in serving at church, I was listening to lies that had been at me for years and began adding to them as I lived a double life. I was a different person depending on the circles I was in, and I did everything I could to make others happy, so I felt accepted. I rarely shared my true feelings with anyone and was always anxious that people would find out who the real me was and not like me. So I wrestled with the contradictions raging in my head and my heart. My desire was still to be like Jesus, but I kept telling myself I wasn't good enough. I had to do more and be more somehow. When I was 19, I was blessed in a relationship by a young man of God who I was able to share some of my truths with, and he helped me start seeing myself differently and that God loved me as I was. When that relationship ended, I was brokenhearted and very angry at God, and I didn't attend church for quite a while. I was seeing a mentor who guided me in discipleship and seeking God out for myself. And in that process, I falsely claimed the promise from Psalm 37 verse 4, that if I took delight in God, he would give me the desires of my heart. However, I was too busy writing my list, the desires, and trying to do what I thought was right to listen to him. I just wanted what I wanted, rather than finding that delight in truly knowing who God is. I dreamed and prayed for a man who loved God deeply and wanted to serve him so we could do that together, who would also love me deeply, and that we would have children and our own home for them to grow up in with stability. In 1993, I met Wayne. We were both involved, we were both working for Christian Youth Travel Association in Cooma for the winter season. And a year later, we were married. Check one. We'd moved and were both involved in the Church of Christ in the area we were in as youth leaders, and I was also the worship coordinator. Aside from other ministries, I've always been involved in the worship in churches I've been part of since I was a teenager. It's what draws me close to God. Music and lyrics touch my soul like nothing else and lead me into God's presence, because I've always felt that I don't have the words to express myself. 12 months later, I had our first daughter, Sharia, and 2 years after that, Mackenzie. Check 2. And in 2001, we built our first home in Blair Athol, and we're still there now. Check 3. In late 2001, I reacted to an antibiotic that I was taking for sinusitis. The drug I was given to counteract the anaphylaxis caused a grand mal seizure. I was told it was a one-off as a reaction to the drug and that I would be okay. But after a few more seizures, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. I didn't want to believe it and clung to the hope it was still residual effects from the initial drugs. My doctors didn't agree, so I accepted their opinions and took the medications prescribed just in case, despite other side effects that accumulated over the years. In December 2006, my mum died instantly while asleep in a car accident, as Dad was driving from their home in Perth to spend Christmas with us. Mum had suffered different health issues most of her life, and one had been a diagnosis of early Alzheimer's, and Dad had been her full-time carer for almost 4 years. I'd thankfully been with my girls to see Mum that September, and she knew she was deteriorating and had expressed that she didn't want to be a burden and was scared to get any worse. Her death was one of the hardest things I've experienced, and as the grief of losing her here overtook me, God came through and comforted me with the knowledge that he was blessing her in heaven through some conversations we had with some of their friends. We're told at Mum's service that the day before they'd left to come, Mum and Dad had sung one of Dad's old songs at church. And Mum was glowing. She'd remembered all the words and looked happier than she had in a long time. That morning, she had also told one of her friends that she was ready and just wanted to go home to be with her Jesus. Lamentations 3:32 says, "Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love." Even though losing Mum brought me so much grief, I can see God's compassion for her in granting her desire and taking her to him. It was actually a blessing, and it constantly reaffirms his unfailing love in my heart when I think back over it. A short time later, we also thought we were going to lose my dad when he had a heart attack and needed major surgery to have a defibrillator inserted into his heart muscle. It didn't go well, and they ended up having to remove it due to infection. He was meant to have it put in again once he'd healed, but decided at that time that he didn't want to, even with the risk of the heart issues. While there are continued health complications, Dad's heart is still holding out, and he has since remarried. Wayne's work often caused him to be away for long stints frequently over the years, and as well as the normal challenges of the growing up of two girls, we had quite a few medical issues for both of them. Some difficult and life-altering, so there were specialists, surgeries, hospital stays, and school issues that I dealt with alone, as they frequently came up when Wayne was gone. As time went by, he came to church with me less and less, even when he was at home. I continued taking our girls alone, as I believe my most important job as their mother was to teach and encourage them to also know the Lord. In 2014, after a devastating event that could have seen us lose one of our precious girls, we struggled with understanding how these things could be part of God's plan, and Wayne let me know he was done with church and following God. I started listening to the lies of old again and had bouts of deep loneliness, self-loathing, sadness and depression weighed on me for a long time. I deemed everything that I felt was falling apart was my fault because I was a bad mother, a bad wife, a bad Christian. I just wasn't enough. And I started to crawl more into myself and suppose that nobody liked me or cared about me and what I was going through because I'm insignificant. I then beat myself up for thinking those things because I had no excuse really to be feeling like that. I'm a Christian. God's given me everything I've ever wanted and asked for. A man I know loves me deeply. My beautiful girls, and a home for stability. And besides, there's other people more off than me. I shouldn't feel or think like that. I even believed the lie that I didn't deserve prayer, so I didn't ask for it. I couldn't shake those feelings, so I buried them deep, and the disappointment in myself continued to eat away at me. There are a select few that I would share to a point with, but feeling that I had to do everything alone, I didn't give anyone the opportunity to help me, and I wondered why God wasn't intervening. I kept going through the motions while trying to hold it all together, despite the fact I believed in God and his promises, and I would affirm, pray for, encourage others. I couldn't realise them for myself. I was tempted with thoughts of walking away, that it would be easier to just give up, just stop trying. Thankfully, because of his loving, gracious mercy and my inherited faith and head knowledge, God was always there when I turned to him in desperation. While everything looked good on the outside, I was feeling restless in all areas of my life, and I was very unhappy inside. I'd had enough of the side effects of the medication I was on for epilepsy, and I'd been asking for retesting and trialling stopping it for over 10 years. My GP always took me out of it because of the apparent risks associated. I was on a minimal dosage and I hadn't had any seizures since the initial diagnosis. I'd lost sense of taste and smell, and along with other side effects, had put on close to 20 kilograms in that time. I was no longer compliant with taking the medication, and with a lingering doubt that I even had epilepsy and lots of prayer for protection and confirmation, I stopped taking the medication altogether when I started a food elimination protocol in an attempt to lose weight and feel better about myself. When I saw the GP after losing all the weight and told him I was not taking the medication anymore, he was alarmed and said I had to start taking it immediately, and I was to see him again in 3 days. I was devastated. I was the healthiest I had ever been and feeling the most confident in myself I had ever felt. And there had been no issues or signs of problems whatsoever. But I got scared again. So I did what I was told. The instant I took the first tablet, I felt nauseous. And the next morning when I woke, after just one tablet, some of the side effects were already back. I knew I couldn't go back to all the issues that were sure to return with continued use. So I went back to the doctor and again said I was not taking the drug and requested a referral to a neurologist, as I wouldn't take it until I'd seen one. He said I must until I had. So I rang multiple surgeries and got in the next day with the neurologist who had actually diagnosed me in 2002. After discussing it, he'd said with my non-compliance previously and not having had taken any completely for many months and no seizure issues, it was a no-brainer for him. No pun intended, I'm sure. He gave me an EEG test for confirmation and I was finally cleared of it all. I was elated. God is so good. And I've now been medication-free for over 6 years. 2016 was a year of emotional highs and lows and excitement as we prepared for and enjoyed Shreya's 21st and the wedding of Mackenzie to Daniel. A wonderful young man who'd come into our lives a few years earlier, who we already accepted as part of our family and who we love. Also during that year, Shreya planted a seed in my heart to find my truth in the Lord again. She told me that she sees me as a strong woman of faith. I was stunned. I'd never seen myself that way. I always doubted my faith because of all those not good enough feelings. And she said, "Mum, you are. Look at you, you're still following the Lord. After all the difficult challenges you've faced, you could have blamed God and walked away, but you didn't. You're still committed, you show up, and you press in. I wouldn't be where I am with God if not for you." And then she encouraged me to look into doing one of the Navigate courses with ACOM. It took me a few years to build up the courage as God worked on my stubborn, fearful heart. Full of apprehension because of my self-worth and not believing I was smart enough to study, I finally enrolled at the last minute, and in 2019 took part in the Discover course that involved exploring my own spiritual formation. Oh my goodness, what a year. It was a struggle to overcome the many fears and attacks I felt on all levels. Some events and outside pressures that made my being available both physically and emotionally for necessary modules difficult. My self-doubt and the heartbreaking loss of Wayne's dad tempted me to give up. I'm so grateful for the strength I was learning to fully rely on, and I kept going. And so God revealed to me gently and lovingly over that year that situations and words spoken to me and to me during my formative years had led me to false beliefs about myself and how I perceive him and who he is because of that. Because I harboured anger, dissatisfaction, and the shame of different incidents, over time bitter fruits were growing in my soul. And the false beliefs and disappointments from the expectations that I had of myself and God were causing me to live out of my fears. I was hiding behind the performance of doing what I believed looked right, being a people pleaser, going along and not speaking out when I needed to, because of fear that told me I'd say the wrong thing, cause anger and resentment, and other people would know that I'm not good enough too. My behaviour assisted me in building a wall to protect myself. Instead of drawing people to me as I desired, I was pushing them away by putting on a mask that showed a false confidence and said, I've got it all together and I don't need anyone. God's gift to me for my intentional pressing in and seeking him deeper was a new awareness of myself and of him. And that all the time I thought I was waiting on him, he was waiting for me to see him in his true light and to know myself and my worth in his truth. He showed me that my importance and worth does not rely on what others think of me. And although past circumstances had told me that my needs and wants weren't worthy of being heard, that he hears me. He provided the space, security, and strength to speak out. Things that I had experienced as a child and teenager that shaped me, but had never been uttered from my lips, were released. To receive prayer and redemptive healing. To feel heard and of worth through knowledge, affirmation and love. And I was able to forgive myself and, most importantly, to fully accept forgiveness that God provided to me well before I realised I needed it. He's helping me to stop taking responsibilities for things I don't need to, changing my perspective and responses, and has shown me that a lot of what I thought I was doing for him, he hadn't actually asked of me. We started breaking down the wall I've built, and he revealed that as that wall is turning to rubble, and as I allow myself to grow into who he always planned me to be, Jesus will be seen, not all my failures and insecurities. It's hard when you've thought a certain way for so long to change your mindset, and we're still working on that together. But he's allowed me to rest in him by handing over my performance and striving. He gave me an overhaul of my thinking and growth in my confidence and seeing the realness of my faith. I now hear his gentle whisper of affirmation and conviction above the loud voice of condemnation, guilt, and lies. When I'm tempted to fall back into my old pattern of living under the weight of that shame and regret, I'm quicker to call on his strength, and he shuts it down with his truth. And I know I'm changing. As it says in Philippians 1 verse 6, and I am convinced and sure of this very thing, that he who begun a good work in me will continue until the day of Jesus Christ, right up to the time of his return, developing that good work and perfecting and bringing it to full completion in me. Last year, I was blessed to be part of a tour to Israel, and on the 14th of January, I was given the opportunity to affirm the commitment and enduring desire I'd made as a child to follow Jesus, and I was rebaptised in the Jordan River. The location isn't quite where tradition says Jesus was baptised, as that area is within military territory, but it's close to it. The exhilarating joy, along with the cheers and love from those who were witnessing, was a gift of affirmation from my Heavenly Father that I am and always have been his beloved daughter. Isaiah 43, 1-2 says, I've called you by name. You are mine. When you go through deep waters, I'll be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. As I look back over my story, I wonder why it took me so long to surrender fully to the freedom God offers. Because I can say I have seen and I know God's faithfulness in my life, where he's protected me, covered me with his grace, and gone before me, leading and opening doors when I was drifting and thought he just wasn't there. And while his love is beyond my understanding, I want it, along with the hope it provides, and to give him my whole heart in response. The following song touches me as it reminds me of his promise that while I'm not worthy, when I fail or I think I don't measure up, it doesn't matter because Jesus makes me worthy. God loves me right where I am, and he loves you right where you are too.